I'm thrilled to be able to present to you a group of incredible creative talents who are here to talk to you about their journeys in the world of virtual reality production and distribution. We've had a lot of panels here at Digital Hollywood over the last year about the emerging medium of virtual reality, and for many of you, if you're like me, we've seen this come and go again, so there's an awful lot of speculation about the business and the distribution models and the platforms and the standards and the technologies, and all of those are certainly important. You know, as a guy who worked for the American Film Institute for 20 years, I tend to focus on, you know, what I used to call why bother. At the end of the day, what we're really interested in, and certainly what consumers are interested in and customers are interested in, is the quality and nature of the experience. And from the point of view of the industry, to deliver that experience, you have to have artists and technicians and a team of people whose passion pushes them to be able to create something that's worthwhile for an audience of thousands, millions, tens of millions. And so that's what we focused on today here with our panel of 4 authentic artists and creative talents. And I have a simple way to get started, which gives the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and their work. And it's by answering the first question down the line. And this is the only one I'll do this for, because I really hate that when panelists go down the line every single question. But the first question is a simple one, which is, you know, what is the project that you're most excited about in virtual reality that you can share with the audience, talk about a little, and what did you learn from the production of that experience, which helps you define what you see as the unique qualities of this new medium. And in case it hasn't become obvious, we have one speaker who's calling in from Berlin, Monica. And so she's not able to hear anybody but me, which is a little bit difficult for her. But can you wave to the audience so that we know that you're, see, she knows we're here. And they all waved back, even though you can't see them. So I'm going to start at the far end with Nick, and take it away, Nick. Tell us what you've been working on.
What am I working on? So I have a slightly unusual background. A lot of people who work in VR, especially at this early stage, have a somewhat unusual background. I'm part filmmaker, part software developer, which actually makes it kind of sort of, for me at least, ideal, because the industry is an unusual mix. And the technology is an unusual mix between requiring a creative approach and a technical approach to move things forward. But in short, to address both the rhythm and Nick's desire for us to briefly introduce ourselves, I've worked a couple of years, last, I guess, 10, 15 years in various aspects of consumer software. I suppose I would specialize in user experience, UX. I'm a product guy. I'm also a film director. The most high-profile project I've worked on prior to VR was a documentary about mercenaries. I spent a number of years in war zones. The documentary is called Shadow Company. It was shown a number of festivals, won a lot of awards, which was fun. But on the VR side, what fascinates me is not just what we're doing today, but where this is going, because it should come as no surprise if you haven't been living under a rock, and certainly the people who have taken the time to make it to events like this probably haven't, that the next 10 years is going to significantly change consumption of all media, because it's quite possible there are no screens. So with that in mind, the most interesting thing I've done in the VR space so far is been a combination of software and content. The most recent piece of content I was involved in was the first time NBC's show Blind Spot did a 360 piece. And I find that whole notion of storytelling in a frameless environment fascinating, because it simulates aspects of emotion that you feel in real life. I can go into this at depth, but I won't for now, because everybody else needs to get a chance to talk about what they do.
Thanks, Nick. Jenny.
I'm Jenny Ogden, and I'm president of IQ Productions and producer. I think where we're coming from as we step into VR and more immersive experience is really from a different standpoint, because we started out doing projection design for live theater, live performance, and also projection mapping, architainment, that sort of thing. And so we're not struggling with getting outside of that 16:9 box that everybody else is so used to working in, because we're already working in unusual immersive environments. So we've been doing a lot of full dome immersive experience as well, which is more of a shared experience. And then moving into VR, our first VR pieces were adaptations of our full dome work and putting them into VR. And so it was more of a 360 video experience, but a really easy step into VR. So the first one we did was The Storm, which was a music video that we produced for full dome. And we also do our live theater in full dome environments, so visually immersive live performance, and projection mapping in traditional theaters where we're actually 3D projection mapping the walls, the proscenium, and the stage floor, and wrapping the audience in more of the story. So we're kind of coming at it from that perspective. We're in development now on a property, a brand that we're looking at from a completely 360 story development, story world standpoint, and it'll be across immersive across many formats, including VR and live entertainment and a series, television scripted series. So what I'm looking at for that really is making sure that we're looking at this project from a virtual 360 world that tells the story across formats in different ways. And a lot of people used to call it transmedia. It's not really the popular term right now, but really 360 storytelling. And going from that curated experience that you get in, scripted television or live theater, and then moving into a world where people are actually interacting. So moving from film or video and then shifting into a CG environment, and playing with the third person, first person experience in that manner as well.
Thank you. I'm going to switch it up so that Monica doesn't get bored over there in Berlin, and then we'll come back to Yvette. So we'd love to hear from you about one of the VR projects that you're most excited about that you've worked on, and what you've learned from that about why this is a new medium.
So I actually do hear other people speak, especially when they speak louder.
Oh, good.
So that is nice.
That's a plus.
Yeah, I can actually converse with you guys. So what I'm working on, I am not really a VR creator myself. I'm more sort of advisor, and so I've been advising different people and entities in Hollywood, as well as startups and investment entities. So right now, I actually spent all day here in Berlin with a team at Splash, who are creating new kind of application to let users generate their own sort of virtual reality experiences. And I also work with a team in Los Angeles called Red Pill VR, who are creating new ways for us to experience music. Yesterday was the entire day of Mental World Expo at AWE, meeting new people from around the world. And especially had two very inspiring conversations with a lady from China and a lady from Colombia, in terms of more interesting developments that are happening there. So what really interests me personally is how everything else plugs into virtual augmented mixed reality. So what are the other technologies that could help us to create more compelling content in VR? Specifically artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, how we could sort of join sort of the fictional world with things that we capture in our reality and create sort of a seamless experience between the two of them. But also, something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and one of the things I'm going to do this winter, I am going to teach a small workshop. I wanted to have me for the entire semester, unfortunately I couldn't do that, but I'm actually immensely excited. I am going to be teaching master's students in the best university in Colombia, in Bogota. So sort of the introductory course into virtual reality, as a technology, but really get them thinking what they, coming from their culture, we all know about sort of magical realism of South America, could we bring into this conversation? Because so far, most of the VR development has been happening in America and Western Europe. So one of the things that Lucy said about is how other cultures, from Central and South America, from Africa, from South Asia, from the Middle East, could be stepping into this conversation.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for that. And now our final panelist is Yvette Vargas.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for getting up early and coming this morning. So I am a writer, director, producer, and a VR storyteller, as well as a multi-platform storyteller. So I'm really glad that Jenny mentioned that, because I think that's incredibly important to this entire puzzle, a huge component. So my background is both traditional storytelling. I actually am very involved in traditional television. And then also I have an entire background of digital storytelling, which includes video game background and all kinds of other kinds of digital content. So it was really easy for me to utilize both my storytelling skills as well as my digital storytelling skills and jumping into VR, because I think it really takes a mindset to be able to jump into VR and actually start creating it. You need to understand what a 360 space set environment really is, because that is the frame. Talking about no frame, that is the frame. So at my company, I'm the CEO of my company. It's called Digital Reign, REIGN, and we're really focused on all kinds of experiences, and I'm always looking at it from this 360 multi-platform storytelling kind of place in terms of developing IP, developing story. That's what it's all about first, and then the medium and the platform second. And VR, as we're moving forward, definitely, absolutely, I mean, obviously there's a huge spotlight on AR, VR, and even MR at this point. And I think that spotlight, just in terms of media, is only going to continue to grow, but not just from just because of the attention and the money that's being thrown at it. But I think really, truly, the quality of content is what's going to push it and evolve it. So it's really, it really now is the time for the creators to really jump in, because it's been so led by the technology. But in terms of projects that I'm working on and what I've learned and what I'm most excited about, there are three projects currently that I'm working on, which are all based off of IPs that I've created, and one is a CG animated piece, which is going to premiere on the Sony PlayStation VR, and that specifically came out of an overall multi-platform franchise. So the VR experience of that is another POV and storyline of that overall IP, which is really exciting, obviously, to explore in that space. And the other two are live action. I work in both CG and live action. Both have their pros and their cons. But what I've learned about those two, and they're both very different, but I think is forwarding in terms of sharing. One of them is more of whether there's a conversation. It's basically set at a wedding before the wedding happens, and the subplots and the plot and the subplots unfold literally by the conversations that are happening at the tables at the wedding, which you as the voyeur or your own character in this particular piece, you literally get to figure out what that eventual narrative is by the order of the tables that you visit, which is completely up to you. So one of that kind of freedom of storytelling, I think, is super exciting, and literally figuring out how to still guide a narrative when there is full freedom for the audience member, who is their sense of being is alive in this particular space, and creating their own impressions and memories of being in a piece of content. I think that's fascinating, and definitely something as a creator, as a storyteller working in this medium. That's one of the things that I'm really focused on. And then from the other piece in terms of that particular takeaway, I mean, completely different than the one I just explained. It's literally where the audience member is a character within the world. Absolutely a different way of telling a story. And truly, why I mention these two is that it's just these are different stories now that we get to tell as well. So, I know many, many creators that are trying to jump into the space, and they don't necessarily understand what is the right story to be telling, and POV, and whose POV is it, and therefore what's a strong story because of POV. I personally believe that's a place to start. So those are the kinds of things that we're experimenting with.
Thanks, Yvette. You emphasized in your comments just now POV or point of view, which is clearly something that film has played with before, but you're in a frame. POV, in a sense, could be seen as a subset of the user interface and certainly the user experience, something that you, Nick, talked about prior to the panel. You're very passionate about it. Can you share with the audience and with the other panelists why you think this is the most compelling part of what changes when you're operating in this medium, the whole idea of the user experience?
Oh, that's funny. I thought you were going to ask something else, which is that I was going to say that I thought that POV was the sort of cheapest trick or the lowest hanging fruit, which was kind of the
I would
opposite
never
of what
say that.
Yvette was. No, I know, but I would. So,
okay, good.
Yeah, no, I will say a few things about that. So, one of the reasons why I think user experience is something that people often, I guess, forget when they're making content like this is that traditional content people, and I don't want to pretend that there's a sharp division, but there often is in the case of especially people who are coming into VR very early. If you come from a traditional content background, i.e. Hollywood in the broadest possible sense, you've usually gone, okay, I've got a director, I've got a story, I've got a producer, I've got talent. Fine, if it's documentary, you don't have talent, but same basic idea, you craft your narrative, and then you don't worry about everything else, because for the last 100-something years, the methods of constructing a story, while they've evolved, the methods of the way in which this is consumed haven't fundamentally changed. There's been a disconnect between a screen and an audience. Disconnect is the wrong word. There's been a separation between the screen and the audience, and as such, content people have not had to care about the way in which, the precise way in which the content is distributed and consumed. What they've basically gone is they've gone, okay, we make this thing, and then the techie guys take care of how this is consumed. And what that's led to is, regardless of which particular step of evolution has happened, whether it's been standard definition to high definition, or high definition to 4K, or iTunes, or streaming, it doesn't actually matter, because the content guys stayed within their content box, and they stuffed the content into someone else who would then distribute it. And if you think about what that meant on digital platforms, when we moved beyond the keyboard and screen to the slightly more intimate touch, and now to the even more intimate physical closeness of VR and AR and 360 video. What that's meant is that traditionally content people who have thought of UX as almost a dirty word. UX, by the way, UX means user experience for those who don't know, also called UI. But traditionally UX has been like the menus and buttons you have to wade through. Oh, to get to the content. Now you're at the content, we're good. You're consuming the content, we don't have to worry about UX anymore. That's not the case in 360, absolutely, because the UX becomes part of the content. Even in something as simple as 360 video, where basically all you can do is rotate for now, until Project Tango has its way. All you can do is move around. That's still a very, very important point of user experience. And I think what Nick was getting at was that, which is obviously when we start doing computer-generated and position, translation, interactivity with your hands, changes the game, absolutely. But even something as simple as rotating becomes a thing that you have to take into consideration when you're creating experiences. You also have to take into consideration, by the way, what people sit like or stand like. There's countless 360 video projects that I've come across that are incredibly boring because and I'm sure everybody else feels the same way, while it might not be a popular thing to state, because they're boring and they can be confusing, because when we're at film festivals and we're sitting at spinning chairs and we can kind of go, wow, this is really awesome, look, I'm underwater, there's a whale swimming towards me, not to pick on Weaver, but that's just one project that isn't particularly exciting after the first 30 seconds. The point is that when you're at home, you lean back and you kind of like this. It's not particularly comfortable biomechanically to look around because your shoulders and your neck get in the way. So it behooves us as creators to think about things like this. And this is what user experience and products are all about, which means that you can't just think about you can't just think about the audience as a magical object that exists in a perfect environment. You have to think about, how are they consuming this thing? Are they consuming it like this? Are they consuming it like this? Or do they
So
have
Nick, why is this any different than video games?
Why is which any different?
This argument you're making about the user experience.
It's not so much that it's different to video games. I mean, all pieces of software have always had a creative component and a sort of technical component, and somewhere in there, the head of product, or the person who's responsible for look and feel, has to determine, what do I want the customer or user or viewer to be able to do, and how do I communicate that to them? The basic tenets of user experience design are that a user has to know where they are, what they can do, and how do they get there? Like, what do they click on? It's not dissimilar at all when we're creating a story. What I'm trying to say here is that we're not creating stories, we're creating experiences. And even the 360 video guys have to understand that, because if they think they're just creating stories that are passively consumed, they're screwed, because they'll forever be making things that are either confusing or boring, or worst of all, both.
So, Jenny, your practice has been focused on media that's consumed socially. There is somewhat more of a spectacle in the sense that you're creating the surrounding media that people sit in a conventional theater or a space and consume together. Do you think that VR as a medium is going to be more social than, I mean, sitting in a theater and watching a movie, I guess, is a social experience, but you're not interacting. You're doing a multiplayer game, so you are interacting. Where does VR fit into this social paradigm, and how's your work pointed to that?
Well, first of all, I think that we're already starting to move in that direction with VR and creating social spaces with VR, and I think that we're going to continue to see that happening and moving in that direction. So, the argument being that VR can be very isolating, and some people are wanting to have that sense of community. I agree with, to a certain point, because I love live experience. I love theater. I love immersing an audience in theater, and that combination of immersive engagement and a shared experience, I think, is really great for community. But I also think that in VR and also mixed reality, AR especially, there's still a lot of opportunity for community, like multiplayer gaming and that sort of thing. I think that a lot of VR in social spaces is one of the next things we're going to start seeing.
What do you mean when you say that? What does VR in a social space look like?
Whether it's communicating via an avatar or interacting in a space where you can be aware of the people that are in the space consuming the same content, whether it's virtually or locally. I think that's a direction everything seems to be starting to push. We're also seeing what like IMAX is doing and several other things where they're creating VR social spaces. I know that there's a lot of that in China right now as well, with kind of like what early internet cafes. Now there's VR cafes where people are actually coming to experience VR in a social setting.
Monica, like at the beginning of every single medium, we always have a lot of sorting out to do. And one of the things that's happening now, I think, was brought into the comments you made, and that is that VR is not just an entertainment or a narrative medium. That because of the unique qualities of telepresence or presence, the neurological changes that occur. We see a lot of the enterprise developments in healthcare and development, international development efforts. What are you seeing? You mentioned your work in Colombia and with some of the other international areas. What are you seeing in the non-entertainment area that can help the creative talent think about telling stories in a different way?
Yeah, so actually, I wanted to echo that Nick said, there's a quote actually I wrote down speaking with a friend yesterday, and he said, Hollywood industry is seeing this as all about the media and nothing about the audience. And I feel, sort of just backtracking a little bit to what has just been spoken in the panel, I think that's really a crucial point. Successful VR, will be different depending on who's experiencing it. So if any person steps into the VR space, the VR experience, and no matter who they are, they will leave with the same story you could have done in a traditional format. So it is crucial to embed that sort of variability into the experiences we design, and me being Monica, and Jenny being Jenny, and you, Nick, being Nick. We have to be able to get different takeaways. So it's not as much about sort of the storytelling as about sort of story world experience. And story is an important element, but it's really about how I feel, how I move, what happens to me in that world as an experience.
Are you talking about the whole area of empathy? I'm sorry, are you talking about the whole area that people talk about empathy as one of the takeaways of the VR experience? Is that what you're referencing?
Empathy is a word that I feel has been really overused. It is not about empathy as much as it is about sort of psychological manipulation that can be used for either good or bad. And empathy can be sort of one of the processes. It cannot be the end goal. For me, good VR generates some kind of change, and we feel for whatever that we experience, and then we come out of that experience and we want to bring it back into sort of our physical life and change our behavioral patterns, or go and help this community that we experienced, or go and participate, or go and learn about them, or go and visit that particular place. But actually, what you asked me is a question that I haven't sort of answered yet. I think there's a lot of things that will go, especially in VR and MR space, though all of that will merge, be sort of the future reality which we're experiencing mode that we would choose. If the R as physical reality is 0% and total sort of fully immersive virtual reality is 100%, we'll go anywhere from the 5% to 99%. But there will be so many more use cases that will actually allow us to do something, improve something that we already do in our physical lives with the help of this immersive media technology, and with a different level of transparency. So one particular thing that I'm very interested in, because I've been quite involved in volumetric capture space, so sort of holographic virtual reality. How can we sort of really capture ourselves on holograms? And that got me thinking about a whole lot of stuff, especially with what we see is happening, in our politics, the rise of sort of the right wing, people wanting to, exit Brexit, exit European Union, build walls, create borders, not let sort of free flow of creativity. That's sort of what politics imposes on us. But that's not what the young generation wants. We want to connect. I'm more interested to collaborate with an artist or with a technologist from Nigeria than I am interested to collaborate with somebody, let's say, in Europe, where I'm from. So I think in that area, what would be very interesting is how holographic capture and sort of augmented reality, mixed reality devices will allow us to really cross the borders. So let's say, I am, an artist or sort of, creative technologist in, let's say, Nigeria, and I'm collaborating with my partner in San Francisco, and we want to do a project, or we are doing a project with Google X, but the government would not issue me a visa. My American partner can go and very well visit the Google X labs, and that's not right now, but with the next generation of, let's say, HoloLens, I could really participate in that meeting. I could really see everybody in the room. I could see whatever the new technologies that they're showing me, and they could also see me as a hologram. So that is.
That's
so
interesting. I think that you're talking about VR as almost a production tool or as a component within the tool set of what creators can access. It leads me to another question that I prepared, which I'll throw out to Yvette, and that is, so, I think a lot of how many people in the audience are either currently producing VR or immersive media or are trying to get into the production side of it? So let's talk a little about the tools, because I think maybe this could be helpful. From start to finish in the conception of your project to the distribution of it, what tools do you need that for this production that you wouldn't have needed if you were making it a conventional linear production? What are the things that are different? Obviously, if you're live action, there's cameras, but what else? What else?
Yeah.
is that question to me, or?
Oh, I'm going to throw it to Yvette so we can mix it up a little.
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, as I mentioned, I work on both the CG side as well as 360 video. Yes, obviously the cameras are different. The post production is extremely different and takes longer in most cases.
To the editing, are there different editing tools that you use? I mean,
well, of course, we all know that the initial stage of stitching the media together, all of the video together, but then it goes through just an incredible process of just the different enhancements that you want to actually make to that 360 environment. Bringing in CG into a 360 world to make it look realer. So there's absolutely there's a good deal of that goes on, and then sound. There's just more focus on sound than in traditional 2D, because again, it's making this world, making this environment, making this experience seem real. We really are creating the real, and sound is a huge component of that, and the wrong sound can easily just pull someone out. So the emphasis on sound is greater, but the creativity of sound is pretty fantastic in terms of opening up even possibilities in that world. And then then going down to distribution. I mean, so then the different kinds of formats for distribution, and for instance, the CG project that I'm working on. I mean, it literally will be available in 12 different formats. So that's another consideration.
So do you have a Rosetta Stone format manufacturing tool?
I wish. I wish. It's literally knowing the various formats and platforms that literally you're going to distribute it on from the very beginning, because you need to plan how you're going to capture that and finally do the deliverables, and if there are levels of interactivity within your experience, then how much interactivity can actually then ultimately come down to the lowest common denominator, which could be just someone that's experiencing on this. So I mean, all of these kinds of this kind of thinking and this kind of strategy is very different from a 2D kind of production from the very beginning. I mean, really knowing your end game in VR 360, it's huge. It's huge. You really need to know what that ultimate final piece of content that you're putting out there, and how you're putting it out there, and to whom you're putting it out there.
Nick is squirming in his seat. Go ahead.
I think, this is not really a disagreement, just to add on, is that there was one fundamental way in which it's the same. And the fundamental way in which it's the same, which unfortunately a lot of productions so far appear to have forgotten, is that we need to make people give a shit about these stories. We need to make them emote, or at least encourage them to emote, give them the tools which they can then use to emote, because if they don't, they're not going to want to do any of this stuff. And this industry is still, while multiple billions of dollars have been spent on hardware and platform, and a disproportionately small amount has been spent on content. Unfortunately, there's a lot of content out there that simply, while it makes for a magical demo, it's not that compelling. I'll give you one quick example. Tilt brush. No one who's tried Tilt Brush would probably likely disagree with the fact that it's a fundamentally magical experience. In 10 seconds, it allows you to paint in 3D space, and the paint stays there, and you kind of walk around this glowing light painting. However, I've showed Tilt Brush to, 100-something people. Everybody thought it was awesome. No one, with the exception of one who's actually an artist, has ever asked to use it again. They've just thought it was an awesome demo. Whereas if you show, Peaky Blinders and Black Mirror to 100 people, chances are that almost all of them are going to want to watch the whole show. And if you haven't seen Peaky Blinders or Black Mirror, please do.
Black Mirror for season 3 tomorrow.
Yes,
Drops
for
on Netflix.
entirely different
I can hardly
reasons. But
wait.
what I'm trying to say is that compelling content is something that I think, as generally as an industry, and for that matter as an audience, it's like people have grown accustomed to a very high level of entertainment. I'm not suggesting, or rather I am, but it's a subject for a different panel, of whether or not passive experiences, i.e. creator-guided, more traditional scripted narrative, versus fully interactive, high audience agency, traditionally gaming-like experiences are better or worse. They're very different. Again, different debate. I am, however, suggesting that we need to up our game. And the way to up our game is to go, hang on a second, I know it's hard to make these things, but we got to make stuff that people actually care about and emote through and get excited about, because otherwise we're just making a bunch of demos. That's all anyway.
Well, do you think, Jenny, we're in an odd place in 2016 because it's the beginning of a medium in a sense, even though it's been around for a while in some form. This is certainly the economic explosion and the buzz that's going on in 2016, 2015. But at the same time, it's the chicken and egg problem. There's hardly any audience for all of these devices put together, even cardboard, which is not a terribly great experience.
PlayStation VR is going to change that in a significant way, which of course just came out, 3-4 days ago, so the anticipated numbers for Christmas is going to be nuts. I think anyway, sorry, just wanted to cut in.
And agreed,
with that.
I want to definitely jump on that bandwagon. I think, looking back at the milestone of PlayStation VR, literally hitting the market with that kind of infiltration that they already have, 42+ million consoles in the world, I think is going to be a significant milestone in the space.
Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back also to your production workflow and toolkit. Do you find that you're doing a lot more pre-planning and pre-visualizations for a project when you're working in VR?
Yes, absolutely. There's definitely more work upfront in the process in terms of just pure development, and certainly with storyboards, that they've never really been more important. I think in this particular process, to not necessarily for the creator, but certainly to get the team on board and to really understand what will be the final piece of content at the end. So that particular aspect of it is pretty significant. And going back to storyboards, we're not talking about frames. We're literally talking about it's a storyboard scene, or major beats within a story. So it's really like major scene beat frame storyboards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in our work we do a lot of animatics, pre-visualization, and taking that into actually into a VR, even if it's just something that you can do a previs in cardboard or on your in 360, really creating an animatic moving storyboard and being able to plan, because fix it in post when you're talking VR or immersive is not what you want to be doing. That's a big no-no. You used to always hear, we'll fix it in post in traditional traditional media, right? But
Well, and then there
that's a
was
huge proposition now.
the period when suddenly, because of digital, you could remove wires on. So there were romantic comedies that were fixed in post, whereas it used to be action movies and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So-
We're closing in on the end of this session, and I want to make sure we have enough room for some questions if there are some from the audience. But it is a group that's eager to learn about the production side of it, and no production seminar would be complete without a discussion of money. And so I know that this, I started out by saying this was focused on creativity, but it's really hard to be creative if you don't have a budget. And here's my dilemma. And I started with the question a minute ago about a chicken and egg, but it's with regard to budgets. It would seem to me that we have 3 sources of funding that are currently underway. Number one, marketing money. So people are doing 360 video executions for brands and ad agencies and media, movie releases, and these are marketing budgets. The second is technology companies. There's a fund from Oculus, there's a fund from HTC, et cetera. And then third, and this is the sort of traditional content model, we see it a little bit in games, and that is there's somebody that's putting up an advance against royalties, and it's a pay-per-buy model or a subscription payout to that investment. It seems to me until we get to the last of the 3, the vision that Nick outlined earlier about really spectacular content that competes with the stuff that we see from the mainstream is going to be hard to get.
Well, it doesn't. To be clear, it doesn't have to be wham bam. It's not. When I'm talking about Star Trek, I'm just talking about take a look around at any 360 video scripted narrative piece released so far, and prove to me that it isn't shit, because they all are. Because the performances are bad, the directing is bad, the story's not particularly great. And why is that? Because it's hard to make this stuff. So people kill themselves trying to make it, and they forget about the basic fundamentals.
But is it a budget issue? Because they're basically
self-funding? I don't know that it is. I mean, there's plenty of stuff we've seen over the years come through Sundances and various other film festivals, which is, indie people. Primer is an older example, but people put stuff together for near $0. And if you have a good story and you can find talented performers, which, by the way, this town is chock full of, you just got to look.
They're all in the audience. What, are you kidding me?
Well, maybe, who knows? I'm just saying that it is possible to make good stuff. It's just my worry is sometimes when creative people enter a technical environment, they get blinded by the technology and they forget about what they actually know about. A typical example is there's an article I wrote called "Cinematic VR is not an Easter egg hunt," and essentially I happen to point at a particular person who's a very talented filmmaker, and one of her first 360 projects involved dancers in every single possible axis. There's a dancer over here, there's a dancer over here, over here, over here, and I remember talking to her, and I go, why did you do this? Like, all your film work is actually really good. Why did you make something that's so confusing? And she goes, because it's 360, right? You got to put something everywhere. It's 360. And I go, no. You're a storyteller, and I know I understand that obviously there's a fundamental difference between VR and 360 video, but in this particular case it was 360 video, and I said, you're a storyteller. Your job, if you wish to be a storyteller, is to tell a compelling story, not to tell a confusing story, not to just go, well, here's the world and the world is real, because guess what? How many times have you in the audience looked behind you during this talk? Probably never, unless you were, looking for the door or trying to figure out what time it is and trying to find a clock somewhere. But the point is, in most things in life, even though, yes, we live in a 360 environment, and yes, our ears hear 360, as Yvette pointed out, audio is very, very fundamental. Our eyes do not. Our eyes see about 170, and we can focus on about 20 degrees.
I'm going to cut you off
Yes,
because
go ahead.
you're not answering my question, and we have 7 minutes left. Okay. And somebody else want to answer that question?
Yes.
I think you were talking about financing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think personally there's financing coming in 3 different formats, and that third format of having a subscription base or a pay-per-play, or having investors that are interested in future royalties is the piece of the puzzle that we haven't fully figured out. I think telling your story in a multi-format and having VR be a component of that is probably the first step in that direction in getting proper funding and making sure that your story world as a whole is
Because we don't
supporting
have a fully developed market
every
yet.
format. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to that because that's exactly what we're doing, and literally, you know, bundling the experience of VR with another medium.
Are you
So-
bundling the budget inside the overall
Absolutely.
project?
Oh yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
you're not pitching this as a separate
Well,
P&L.
so two projects are just individually. They're pretty much standalones in terms of VR, but they are part of a larger multi-platform strategy and franchise and story world.
Okay.
It might premiere as VR, but there's much more to it, and other media available.
And other
to those
revenue
franchises.
streams.
Exactly. But
Well,
in terms
I'm going to
of,
throw it open to Monica just because, again, we are going to run out of time, and I want to make sure that you're patiently sitting in Berlin in a white room. So the projects you're working on, how are they funded? I mean, do you have a pattern?
Which one?
Well, any of them. I mean, just do you have have any advice for the aspiring VR content producers here in terms of where to look for money?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things, but as just being said, in terms of not just looking to do VR experience, but connecting it to something larger that can also exist across the media that is established. What's amazing about VR is that if you make it any good at all, it gets so much attention. It's really written about, it's really seen by not all the eyeballs, but the eyeballs that you really want to attract. So I think it's really, really good to think how you can create a world, and an aspect of that world, so the cherry on the cake, can be experienced via VR, and especially if it can be experienced sort of via sort of location-based VR, full body immersive kind of experience, because that will just be really seen and covered and will excite audiences. Now, the other aspect is a lot of the startups, and it's going to become harder and harder in the year 2017 as we start seeing sort of the first, bigger failures of VR, and so it's going to be a harder year to survive. But still, the startups that have some kind of proprietary technologies that are creating tools are still receiving quite a bit of generous funding from the venture capitalists. And they all do need to prove that their technology is worthwhile and that they can produce interesting content with it.
That is another one of the sources, yeah.
With not just the Oculus 5, Sony, PlayStation, but also a bunch of companies in that startup scene that some of them raise in the high tens of millions of dollars. I think that's an interesting way to fund cool content.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to have to open it up to the audience. Yes, sir, what's your question?
Do you guys have any 360 VR projects you'd like to recommend as what you think is starting to achieve?
The question is, do we have any killer apps that we can recommend? We've talked about some things that don't work. What is working for you?
Pearl, first 360 videos ago. Pearl is, at its heart, it's a music video, but it's a cute story about a girl in a car. And it's, I happen to know Patrick Osborne, who directed it, but regardless, it's a really solid 360 video piece to check out. You can see it on YouTube, Google.
Other
Spotlight.
candidates for awesome experiences?
well, I think we're going to start to see it now on Sony PlayStation 4 and just like first quarter of 2017. I think we're going to start to see some, just because now we have the ability to see some better quality. But I would look in the what's been done in some of the news journalism space. There are some heroes there.
Jenny, any suggestions?
Somebody was showing me, I think it was called Luna yesterday, that was looked really compelling. I really like looking at things that aren't just another first-person shooter experience. That doesn't really interest me on any level, really, but I know that that's the first VR gaming place that people go. And I think that for me, VR and immersive entertainment is so experiential, and I think that it has the power to impact people in a really visceral way. I think that that's something, to me, that we should be also looking at is how we're impacting people in society.
Well, you know, when the transmedia thing was first blowing up and people asked me, what have I seen that I want to recommend, I came up with a one-liner that seems to have persisted, which is, I'm waiting for it to make me cry. And, you know, the reality is that it's almost a virtual reality experience in a movie when you're captivated in that, even within a frame. So that's the bar for me. Monica, do you have any candidates for great experiences that you want to recommend to the audience?
Are we talking about 360 or?
Either one.
I would say Everest VR by Sulfur. I, again, do not love horror-based stuff and sort of violence-based stuff because I feel that as technology gets better, it will actually induce real-life PTSD. So definitely into, experiences that, sort of are all about making us curious and making us want to explore, making us want to move, and especially stuff that is interactive. And I think Everest is really that, because you find yourself on Mount Everest, the landscape is absolutely gorgeous, you can actually walk, you can walk across the bridge, you can climb the bridge, and you get more than as if you were just on, the word just is not suitable, but if you were on the physical Everest, you would be rushing and being afraid of, getting into an avalanche, et cetera, whereas here you can explore and marvel at your leisure, and you really sort of start realizing how incredible our planet is and want to go back into your physical life and explore maybe the landscape around you.
Good.
So I think that's a beautiful use case.
That's a good example. I think we're going to get the high sign, but I'll take, anybody else have a final question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it seems like for, several years, VR has been more about, concept, and maybe a lot of the funding that goes into it is sort of about developing the technology, and maybe the story is kind of secondary to the technology itself. And maybe I'm just kind of curious about the people who are funding these projects, maybe in the past, not really concerned with the profitability of the story itself. And, as this technology becomes more mainstream with Sony or Oculus, how that might change the funding or the expectations of the people investing in this, and how important the storyline becomes. Can you respond to that or talk about how right or wrong that is?
I'm hearing a lot from everyone that right now all the money is going into the tech, but we need to remember that the tech's only cool for a minute, and then it has to be the entertainment value. Does it move you? Does it compel you to want to experience more? Because I always figure that I'm successful if you've completely forgotten about the tech and you're fully immersed in the story or the experience. Narrative's changing a little bit. It's more about experience than, watching a story on a screen. So, are you moved by that experience? Are you compelled to more or look for more in that immersive world? I think that really quickly the tech will get boring.
Well,
If we
Jenny,
don't
you
have
work
a
with a
look
lot of the studios, and if you were at the dinner the other night, there was a lineup of, Warner Brothers and Legendary and Fox and the others, and I think it's fairly safe to say that the first segment of funding, which is the ancillary marketing thing, is going to become standardized for most
Studios.
tentpole movies in Hollywood within the next, if they're being created now. Ready Player One will have a virtual reality experience because it's a virtual reality storyline in the regular movie. And I think that generally speaking, that's going to begin to happen. And if there's an audience for it, it'll begin to build it. So to some degree, what the questioner is asking is a matter of time. But I would also say for independents who are not financed by studios, largely, we're still waiting for some, kind of aha breakthroughs that might be
I mean,
Yeah.
look,
hitting the standards we're talking about here on
I
this
think
panel.
what Nick said, which is that we need things that make us cry, is absolutely fundamental. Your point is slightly trickier to parse because, yes, of course, story is important, but at the end of the day, until there's ticket sales or some kind of subscription model, the reason why there's so much money invested in hardware and IP and tech IP is because that's where the exits are. Because in the next 18 to 24 months, when, as has been pointed out, a lot of these companies will fail, that raised a lot of money initially because the valuations were wrong or because they're jaunt, then what'll happen is that, sorry, it's a bad joke. What'll happen is that you're raising money because that you can exit these companies, you can create successful environments. And yes, there are certainly people who have raised for content. Baobab is the most recent example. They raised, their B round of 25 million. That's rare, and it's very hard to do that. However, I think when this all needs to move forward in tandem. A rising tide lifts all ships. If we make better content, people will eventually start paying for this because people pay for things that they like using. I mean, they pay $1 for Little Angry Birds type games because of the fact that they spend a lot of time on them. So those models are still being evolved, but I absolutely think that a very, very fundamental aspect of this is story. A lot of the industry doesn't quite get it as obviously as perhaps you're thinking they might, but it'll come because it's without story, we don't have compelling experiences, we don't have emotion, and we're never going to have attention.
I mean, I think if it ever got to the point where you could get like a Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt, the talent to make a movie in VR, 3D, and it be something that you can sell tickets to on a broad scale, or
Well, how about the sequel to Blade Runner, which is where there's a VR experience?
I mean, it'll happen in less than 12 months. I think a major Hollywood name talent will be in something. I mean, Invisible, which you may have heard about, was a project that came out fairly recently that was a high-profile Hollywood director involved. For some reason, my mind's blanking on the name of the guy. Can someone help me out? He directed Born Identity. Doug Liman. There we go. Doug Liman. Doug Liman was very, very major Hollywood.
And there was an ad in the New York for that this week.
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
was
yeah.
amazing.
So that's on the directing side. So certainly the talent is one or two steps away at best. Talent chases money because it's their agents don't want to do these deals because their 10% slice of zero is zero. So it's coming. It's literally is it going to be Sony or Oculus dropping the dollars for a major star or Google or somebody? But it'll be in the next 12 months. The conversations are being had.
Not only is it coming, but so is the end of this panel. I want to thank the audience for it filled up nicely, and I'd like to especially thank our panelists, including Monica in Berlin. Thank you for your patience and for your participation. And just as a summary, I think what we're experiencing here is what we always experience on the creative side, which is we all want it to be as good as we possibly can make it. And for myself, I would say that that's only going to happen when there's a large influx of creative talent from all sources. And we've seen time and time again, as Nick mentioned with Sundance, I mean, if you saw a film like Tangerine, which was made with iPhones, it was a great movie, it was a great story, totally unique. Where did that guy come from? We want all of you to be creating and thinking of things to create in this new medium because we want it to be better.
I just wanted to jump in, going back on the question in terms of content. Just because the studios aren't doing it doesn't mean that someone in this room can't do it. This is the opportunity, actually. It's like, yes, so you have to find the money, but the community, the VR community is actually extremely collaborative. Everyone's trying to figure it out. You can find a way of doing it. And that's the opportunity because, the studios, it really is about the ROI. They're not going to take the risk yet, the big risks yet. But that's the opportunity for somebody else to take the risk and start figuring it out.
And she has the last word. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Monica.